Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. I have a great show today. I've been waiting for this show for a number of weeks. And of course, everybody that watches the show, you know that we love health. I mean, we love talking about health. We love talking about what we put in our bodies. We love talking about what the future of health is going to look like. Because as you know, it's not about getting old and being unhealthy. It's about getting old and staying healthy. And of course, one thing that's really leading the charge are so many companies out there, biotech companies that are bringing amazing drugs to market. And of course, they have to get to market. So we brought on a real leader in the field. She is really a worldwide leading expert. Her name is Christina Ansted. And of course, she is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Rapid Commercialization Partners. And what they do is very remarkable. They help these biotech companies from A to Z get their products to market. So it's people like Christina and everybody at the company that we really need to be thankful for, because without people like Christina and her entire team, you know, some of these drugs don't get to market. So she has a great business. She helps them from A to Z. She's a leader in the space. Christina, welcome to the DotCom magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. And of course, what you do really is you optimize commercial development to drive value for your clients. And of course, you accelerate the time to market and you really maximize revenue potential for your clients. But before we get started, because we have so many questions, let's pull the lens back to 30,000 feet. Tell us what you do at Rapid Commercialization Partners, and then we're going to get into it.
All right, happy to. So what we do at RCP is help early clinical stage biotech companies to commercialize faster. So what that means is once a company has an identified asset, they're taking it out of the clinic, they're ready to bring it to market. That process is very complex. So we come in at an early stage prior to there being a large commercial footprint and really work closely with them to make sure that the fundamentals, the foundation is set properly so that they are better poised to optimize their long-term success.
Yeah, I love it. Of course, you have so many companies out there that are trying to change the world. They're trying to rapidly accelerate the commercialization of their product. So what's the conversation sound like, Christina, when they reach out to you? I mean, what's that first conversation sound like with one of these biotech companies that are trying to get to market?
Sure, great question. A lot of it depends on where they are along that continuum. So if they're very, very early, sometimes it's about the market potential of a particular indication or asset positioning for them in terms of future investment or how they're going to enter the market. And it might be also a little bit further down the line where it's talking to payers, understanding what's going to be required for reimbursement, making sure that we have relationships with investigators and key opinion leaders. So it really is a customized approach depending on where a particular client is along that journey.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, you just don't make recommendations. I mean, you're involved with the execution as well. So let's talk about that.
Right.
I love that so much.
That's a great point. And that is one of our distinguishing characteristics in that we're not like a traditional consulting group, which are very valuable and certainly have their place. But the difference is that we are really an end-to-end solution. So we come in, we understand the market, we devise that strategy, but then we're there through the implementation. So we ensure that that execution is done correctly. And we're also there to help them train their internal team. So as the company is growing, we integrate those team members into the strategy to make sure that they can continue when we exit.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Let's talk about it a little bit for the people watching the show, Christina. They're saying to themselves, wow, you know, we hear about all these miracle things that are happening in the health category. When we think about sort of the commercialization of what you're involved with, the biotech product, what are some of the things that are so exciting out there right now? You know, some of the diseases or some of the processes that are going on that people are just going to be blown away when they hear you say it?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. So there is so much. Certainly, I think most people are familiar and have heard about gene therapy and what gene therapy can do. And while we're not changing the DNA of our patients, some of it is about either a loss of function correction. So there's a mutation in a particular gene, and therapies are being devised to bridge the gap of that dysfunction so that the function returns. And it may not be as it would have been initially, but it is transformative nonetheless. There's things like enzyme replacement therapies, again, that help restore function where function is missing, either through a somatic mutation or a genetic mutation. There are medicines that are coming to light that deal with inflammation, arresting inflammation, controlling inflammation, which has implications in many, many diseases, from rheumatoid arthritis to cancer. So these are just a high level of some of the innovations that are occurring right now in biotech.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Christina. You have this operational philosophy at the business where the entire business has been designed really to rapidly accelerate commercialization for clinical stage biotech companies. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about your team, because sure, you have to have a great team to get through this entire process with the speed of experience that you have, right? That's correct.
So the team is really the essence of RCP. And that's because the team is built of senior level executives. These are seasoned professionals in biotech. They have led their own teams, led their own departments. They have been, vice presidents of biotech companies before, and they are really subject matter experts in their field. And that's another, I think, distinguishing characteristic of RCP in the team, is that they haven't had this experience because they've lived vicariously through a client. They've done it in real time, affected real bottom lines, made real decisions. And so we're harnessing all that experience and putting it to use for our clients.
Yeah, I would imagine in this space that eliminating time lost is a very big sort of run to daylight opportunity for your clients. Let's talk about that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's spot on. So, in biotech and commercialization, there's the context of loss of exclusivity or time to exclusivity. And so a lot of the time, right, every commercial team will have a launch trajectory, a planned proposed launch trajectory, and everyone thinks it's going to be exceptional. But oftentimes that isn't the case. And that's because of a lot of these hurdles that we're talking about here in terms of either misguided leadership or inconsistent strategy, and all of that costs time. And the more time you can save, the sharper that curve, and the more time you have to essentially generate return on your investment. So the faster a drug gets to market, the better it is for investors and the company, but also the reason why we do all this is for patients. And so the longer it takes a product to get to market, those are lives that are waiting. And sometimes, depending on what the therapy is, those are lives lost because we can't get there fast enough. So anything that we can do to facilitate that process through relationship conveyance and laying the foundational network is essential and important to us.
I love it. Of course, the patients always come first, the people that are waiting, that need this desperately to help them in their lives to have a longer, better life in terms of their health. Let's talk about something that comes across your desk. Somebody reaches out to you, and it is something that just needs to get to market right now. It's such a great idea. It's incredible. Is there a way to get a fast track or a faster approval for some things, and how does that work?
Sure. That's another great question. So it depends. I think, obviously we don't control the FDA, but I think that there are certainly steps that you can take in terms of beginning those conversations with the FDA, following their guidance, looking at your clinical trial endpoints and understanding, do the endpoints make sense commercially for payers, for reimbursement, having conversations with regulators early. And those are things that you can do to help that process move forward faster. And certainly it's about the data. So without knowing who we're talking about or what that data is. Strength of the data is really everything. Is it human data? Is it mouse data? That really dictates how far you can go at a certain point.
Yeah, it's interesting. As an outsider looking in, someone that's not in this space, of course, I think of these geniuses like in a laboratory, and they're coming up with all these great ideas, and they've got so many PhDs and doctorates and everything else.
True, yeah.
Right. But when it comes to sort of taking that genius that they have for this one particular area, which is the bioscience, and then taking that outcome and then getting it to market, that's a whole different story, a whole different sort of set of skills. Is that the way that it works?
That's exactly right. Very well said. And we work with some very smart, very accomplished, highly published individuals, and they make the commercialization possible. It wouldn't be necessary if we didn't have these wonderful transformative therapies to be able to do something with and bring them to patients. But that process of commercialization is really its own animal. It is fraught with missteps and risk, and you really have to know how to manage it. And within management, you have to have the right relationships to help get you to the next point. And having an impressive product that performs well in trials is not the answer. It's part of it, but it won't get you all the way there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would imagine when your team speaks to these intellects, these super high IQ individuals, you have to be able to sort of relate to them on their level, but also be able to simplify what you can do so that they understand the process to get from point A to Z. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So we have to be able to assimilate highly complex data and material. That's part of the process for understanding the market. You have to be able to understand the therapy, the mechanism of action of the therapy, the disease state, so that you can properly have those conversations with not only payers, but investigators and key opinion leaders who you also need to be on their level. And because disease awareness, disease education, that's a large part of this process, but it is beholden to us to have really an understanding of each of those therapeutic areas so we can move fluidly with these conversations. Not to say that we're all going to suddenly end up with PhDs on all of these different topics, but you definitely have to be able, as you said, talk to them on their same level and exchange that information.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I would imagine that when we take a drug from A to Z, that's sort of what I call the commercialization process. But once you get it approved, then you have to go to market. So are you preparing to go to market at the same time that you're going through the process? How does all that sort of work together?
Yeah, no, it's another great question. So for what I think is that the foundation is always the same. So that's why we call them the fundamentals. So whether you are looking to get acquired, not every company we work with is looking to bring a product to market. That's a very extensive and long-term commitment. But the foundation, whether you're going to bring a drug to market or you want to be acquired or you're looking for investment, those foundational elements are still the same. So the end game, I think we're always looking at is ultimately launch and bringing a product to market and making sure that we have, as I said, those relationships in place with the right people. And your point is valid too about that launch piece where education then becomes vital. So the awareness of the disease, awareness of the therapy, working with diagnostics and laboratories to test for the disease. So it's infinitely complex and probably outside the scope of our conversation, but we're always thinking about what end looks like. What is the end game? What's the outcome as we lay those foundation?
Yeah, let's talk about optimal launch, but we'll keep it high level because this is, you can go super deep. I know you could talk 30 days about this. When a drug is ready to roll, is it imperative to talk to the physicians and the medical community and the administrators at the hospital, or do we approach the actual patients themselves, or is it some combination thereof, or does it depend on the particular drug?
So the simple answer is yes. I mean, you're going to do, and it's very important that, of course, you're talking to payers and regulators, but you need to talk to physicians. You need to talk to the physicians who are going to be the ones most likely to diagnose your patients and the ones who are going to treat your patients. You need to talk to laboratories who are running the tests. All right. And then there's a whole host of pieces of that. Are the right tests in place? Are you able to test for the disease that you're looking at? Sometimes if it's very, very rare, those diagnostic tests don't exist. So you have to create that. But the other large piece of it, again, are the patients, which you mentioned. And usually we don't go directly to a patient, but we work closely with patient organizations to make sure that they are aware of upcoming therapies, what patients are looking for, what is going to matter to patients in their life, and making sure that we can help them address those needs.
Yeah, it's interesting, Christina. Give our viewers an idea of how long it takes to get a drug to market. How long does it take by the time you start, the commercialization process to getting it done?
So that can be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, really. And that's not including development time, research and development. It's really from that, okay, we have harnessed, we have an identified asset, we're ready to move it, to phase 1, phase 2. So that's 3 to 5 years. And there's a lot of variables in that time period. And some of it is, if you get a fast track or not, if FDA wants more data or not. So there's lots of questions there, but that's on average how long it can take.
Are there times when a company has something that perhaps can change the world, a biotech company that just has something that looks so amazing, but they don't have enough money. They run out of money. They can't get the funding, and it doesn't go from point A to Z. How often does that happen? Or do the truly great biotech companies always get the money because what they're potentially going to offer has such great commercialization opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's not an easy answer to that. I think some of it has to do with how well the companies tell their story, how clear their investor story is, what the potential is for patients. So all of that makes a difference in that process. And the companies are always looking for investment so they can continue their development, from more simple crowdfunding attempts to more formal Series A, Series B investment pieces. And the process really, it's not a guarantee that because you have an exceptional asset that it's going to make it to commercial viability. Some of it has to do with how large that opportunity is, how many patients are there really. And sadly, that is part of that, is that if there aren't enough patients to support the development and the commercialization, if you can't get something reimbursed, these are all questions that have to be answered. So it's not a golden ticket per se, that if you have something transformative, it's going to reach commercialization. I use golden ticket in particular because there are opportunities where you get a golden ticket from a large pharma to continue research. And that's very promising. And that can sometimes initiate further investment. But it's a long road. And depending on where the data reads out, not always a guarantee.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Christina. I almost look at it like your team, your company is putting together what I would call a commercial playbook. So let's think about that. I mean, what does that playbook look like? Is that something that you develop early on and then you follow the playbook based on the data that you receive and this background and experience that you have in the commercialization process? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say there's a backbone as you build your commercialization strategy, and that's where those fundamentals come into play. So when we talk about a commercial playbook, it really has to do with that particular client partner and what their needs are, and it defines the strategy. But so what you're going to do now today and what you're going to do tomorrow, and who are the stakeholders a part of that strategy.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I let you go, and I know you've only cut out a certain amount of time, I'm probably going to hold you over. I need you to bring you back on the show. I have so many questions. I want to talk about something that we talk about as entrepreneurs all the time, but I would imagine in your space, it's something that you just need to think about. And that's something called risk avoidance. And we think about sort of the risks, and we think about the biotech companies. do you provide them sort of a risk avoidance map as well about what risks they might encounter and how to get around those risks?
Yeah, to a certain degree, that definitely is true. That's included. And I think some of the risk avoidance comes from experience. So when you know what you're doing, you naturally know where to spend money, for example, where not to spend money, where you want to make those investments and things that you don't want to do. So if the FDA makes a suggestion, you probably want to follow it as an example. So certain things like that come with experience, that we help provide that guidance. And we while we do have exit strategies with our clients, we also remain as a long-term resource for them throughout that process.
Wow. I want to take you into the future just a minute, and then I want to talk about entrepreneurship. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a real honor for us. Let's talk about it. I mean, we think about the future. You're right in the middle of it. I mean, you hear all these great stories. You're involved with so many sort of, biotech, pharmaceutical products. What's the future look like? I mean, do we get healthier? Do we live longer with less disease? What's the future look like according to Christina?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think some of it is in our hands. A lot of how we live and what we can do is affected by our environment, our life choices. So that will always be up to us. And I do think what's changing in biotech is an opportunity to live longer, to give people who didn't get a fair chance at life in the beginning because they were just born with a genetic mutation they had no control over, giving them a better chance at life. And it's also looking at diseases that affect millions of people, like diabetes, obesity, rheumatoid arthritis, that some of these therapies can be transformative for those patients as well, and extend lifespan. So likely we will, as a population on Earth, be living longer, which has its whole host of problems and concerns. But the chance at life is always one worth supporting. And so it's very much an honor for us to be part of that process.
Yeah. And, you've helped so many people along the way with the companies you work with. I'm reading a book right now. They're talking about 3D printing organs. And this is not a science fiction. This is a nonfiction book, and it's very fascinating. So there's so many cool things that are going on. It must be so exciting for you and your team at Rapid Commercialization Partners to be involved in the middle of it all. I wanted to get into entrepreneurship, and I'm going over a little bit, but pardon me for indulging on your time. But I wanted to talk to the younger entrepreneurs watching the show that are maybe hitting a tough time. Maybe they're hitting a roadblock. Maybe they freeze in the frame. They don't know what to do. Maybe you could share some insight to the younger entrepreneurs watching the show about what it takes to get through a tough time in business.
Absolutely. So I would say flexibility is that sometimes you have a very clear idea of who you want to be, what you want your company to be. But I think don't get caught up in that in terms of becoming too rigid, and understand that sometimes what's going to come to you, the opportunity that's going to come your way if your company may not be exactly what you thought, or it may not be in exactly the format that you had in mind, but be open-minded, be flexible, try to adapt and see how that is. Let it change your company and let it evolve. So grow along the way. And sometimes there's just understanding that you have to start somewhere. And those little pieces that you take can really have a massive effect on what your company becomes.
I love that, Christina. Of course, if you're not getting to the point where you have a roadblock, then you're probably not pushing hard enough, as you know, with all the people you work with. One thing that you say that I love about your company is move at the speed of experience. And when I read that just resonated for me, because in this sort of industry, experience is so important. Of course, it's data sets and technology and the process, but it's also about that experience that you bring to the table. I love it. I mean, I'm going to bring you back on the show. This has been remarkable, Christina. I love what you're doing at Rapid Commercialization Partners, of course, RCP Bio. We're going to put all the links up on the interview itself. But Christina, thank you so much for coming on the DotCom magazine show. It's been awesome.